All right, my hope is right now you can see my screen and you can see the email that I sent out to you this morning. If for some reason you can't, please somebody send me a note or break in and let me know. All right, this is day 13, and today we're going to go over Muroc Chapter 8 on responsive website design. When we get done with that chapter, we're going to go through the Halloween example for Chapter 8 as a class. We'll see where we are time-wise at that point. Tomorrow, we're going to build our RWD site together. Now, part of the reason that this was so important that I had this meeting this morning was there's a very, very, very big push on at Rankin that whether you're taking the course online or whether you're taking the course in the classroom, you're getting the same stuff. All right, which you might say, well, yeah, that's the way it should be. It hasn't always been that way. All right. I've had, and I'm not blaming anyone for this. We've started having these weekly meetings, which has really been helpful. But what I found out today was in the material that we've covered in chapters 1 through 7, in the classroom, they haven't even covered all of those chapters. They're skipping around a little bit. No one had told me that. All right. In addition, to me, the hardest 3 chapters in this textbook, the hardest 3 chapters are chapter 8, chapter 9, and chapter 10. We're going to do chapter 8 today on responsive website design. All right. Chapter 9, which we'll go over next week, is on Flexbox. Chapter 10, which is probably the hardest out of all of them, is CSS Grid. Well, I was told today, no, we're not doing grid anymore. We're skipping that chapter. And again, like I said, no one had told me that. All right. And that's fine. All right. You'll learn enough with Flexbox that you'll be able to apply it to grid. So it's not a real big thing one way or the other. All right. Now, I gave you lab the last 2 days, and hopefully people have had a chance to catch up. There's only one thing I want to say, and then I'm going to begin today's lecture, and that is this. All right. So let's pretend that, again, I'm a student in the class, and this is my homework folder. All right. And so far in my homework folder, I'm just pretending here that I have done chapters 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And actually, I didn't do 8. I just copied it over from chapter 7. All right. So in other words, that's what's in there. And now we worked on chapter 8 as a class, and I'm ready to turn it in. If you get to that point, you do not have to create a new GitHub repo. All you have to do is go back to here where we've got our Git and go back in and do a Git bash here. You don't need to do a Git init because we've already got that. So all you need to do is your Git add dot, and that'll add everything. Then your Git commit -m, and for example, you can put in there Halloween chapter 8 or something like that. All right. Then if you do your git push -u origin, and again, for some of you it's master, for some of you it's main, that will update the repository. There is absolutely no reason that you have to make a new repository for every assignment. All right, then pretty soon you're going to have 20 or 30 repositories, and it makes it very hard for me to sit there and grade and know which is which, etc. All right. And that will apply whether if you broke this up into 4 repos, like I mentioned, you'll do it the same way, whether it is your homework or your labs or your written tests or your hands-on tests. You'll go through the process that I just showed you. Now, if I did that too fast, I'm going to have to meet with you separately on that. All right. Because I do want to go in and get into chapter 8 right now. All right. Now, I'm not sure if I'm going to have time this weekend to update this. If I don't, we'll just use the one that I'd done a few years ago. This was after the Blues had won the Stanley Cup. And we're gonna do this a couple ways. We're first going to do what's called create a landing page. And it doesn't look like much. That's it. And I know it doesn't look like much, but we'll talk about what it is, etc. But you'll notice in here that as the size of this changes, what shows on the screen changes as well. That is responsive website design. This is how your thing would look basically on a phone. It ain't perfect, but it's not bad either. If I move it out, that's pretty much how it would look on a tablet. And if I bring it out even more, that's how it would look then on a laptop or a desktop. That is what responsive website design is about. So I'd like us to first create this landing page, which we'll do probably tomorrow. And then we're going to create a whole site just to show you what the site looks like. And it's nothing fantastic. All right, I may have even shown this to you a week or so ago. I don't know. But this is what the homepage looks like. And you'll notice when I make it smaller, you can see how it changes. Again, that is responsive web design in action. Then I've got an about page, and it's got different pictures on here. And when you click a picture, like if I click this one, you'll notice it comes up here. And again, when I make this smaller, you can see that it is responsive. All right. The other thing I like about this example is it'll also give us the chance to start working on forms. All right. So this is what our form looks like. And don't worry about what it means or anything. We will go over all of it. But again, you'll see that it is now responsive. All right. And then finally, this page, which we probably won't get to right away, but we will eventually, this has got JavaScript in it. All right, but it'll give us the chance to start looking at some of the stuff that we are going to be working with for the rest of the semester in here. All right, so this is that page that I showed you, that single page before there's been any CSS added. And then you saw that after we added the CSS, it looks like this. All right, so that's what we're starting to talk about today. All right, so with that said, let me jump into chapter 8. So chapter 8 starts in your book, all right, on page 251. Not a super long chapter, all right, about 30 or 35 pages. You'll notice that we start with an introduction into responsive web design. Responsive web design is you want to make sure that your website looks good regardless of the device that you're looking at it on. So it should look nice whether it's on a phone, a tablet, a laptop, a desktop, or whatever. All right, now just so you're aware of this, you may care, you may not care. But if I go out to our old friends here, in fact, I'm going to put in here W3 schools, and I'm going to type after that responsive website design. And I believe that they actually have a whole unit on that. So if you think you're getting cheated or there's something you don't understand, or maybe we went over something too quickly or whatever, all right, you can, if you are so, you have the time and the desire, you can go out then, and again, to right there. In fact, it is right, just right here. So just w3schools.com/html/html_responsive.asp. All right. Because one of the really, really important things about being able to be a web designer is being able to design things responsively. All right. And just so if you say, I still don't get it, let me just show you one more thing real quick. All right. And that is this, that what we're going to do later is this, we're going to take this and make it responsive. This is chapter 8, but all I did was copy it in. All I did was copy it in from chapter 7. This is what we did the other day. But when we make this smaller, this is not responsive. And if you say, what do you mean? You're going to see, because you're going to take this with me and make it responsive before the end of class today. All right. So There's 3 components to responsive web design we'll talk about. How to test a responsive design, we'll talk about that. All right. These 3 components that they talk about, they're pretty simple. Number 1 is we want to use a fluid design. What that means is we don't want a fixed layout. We don't want a size so this thing is always 960 pixels or whatever. We want to be able to have this be the right size. Again, the right size regardless of how we're looking at it. So that's one thing, having this fluid design. So what that means is we want to use rems and ems and percentages whenever possible, and pixels and points as little as possible. All right, by doing that, we will be having or creating a more fluid design. All right, the second point in here is we want our images to be responsive. So as the size of the screen increases or decreases, we want to be able to account for that with our images as well. And the last thing that you have to do in here, you have to create what are called media queries. This is probably, in what we're going to be doing in here, as close as we'll get in this part of the class to doing any programming. All right, so we're going to talk about all of those things in here. We're also going to talk about a plugin that you can use that's called Slick Nav. And don't worry about it right now. We'll talk about it in a bit. And as the authors most of the time do, they end here with a web page that actually introduces or shows responsive web design. And they show you both the HTML for it and the CSS for it. When you start working with responsive web design, most of the work that you're going to end up doing is going to be in the CSS. All right. If you've already got your web page built, you'll do very little HTML. Almost everything that you do will be CSS. All right, so let's jump into this then. All right, so again, here's where they say the 3 components. It's already what I told you. Fluid layouts rather than fixed layouts. That way the web page adjusts to the screen size. Second, scalable images. All right, pretty much the same kind of thing in that the images adjust to the size of whatever they're being contained in. So as it says, you know, when you go from a laptop to a phone, the image should get smaller and vice versa. All right. Then finally, as it says right here, you can do some work with just working with fluid layouts and with scalable images, but there's other things you want to do as well. And to do that, as it says, you'll use media queries. I'm going to write something for you a little later, and I've got it done already, but I'll share it out there for you later, but it'll start to show you why media queries are important. All right. So as it says here, here is a website that uses responsive design. What does that mean? Here's what it would probably look like if we looked at it on a laptop. Here's what it would look like on a phone in landscape. Here's what it would look like on a phone, in portrait. Here's what it would look like in a phone on landscape. So not only should it look good, regardless of the media you're using, desktop, laptop, etc., but it should also look good regardless of the orientation that you're using. Be that portrait like this or landscape like this. So you're trying to account for it as best you can. Now I'm going to leave this up there for just a second for these 3 components and for this definition, but hopefully you agree that's what I just told you. Now I didn't maybe use their exact words for responsive web design, but the idea is the same as what I told you. So this chapter, we're talking about these 3 components: fluid layout, scalable images, and media queries. You put all those together, and the idea is that allows you to create responsive web design. Now, I'm going to mention something right now. It's sort of mentioned in the book, but they don't spend a lot of time on it. But I just want to say something about this to you. There's kind of two schools of thought when you start to create a website. All right. Some people, they're like, you know what? Everybody who uses this is going to be using a desktop and a laptop. So they do it kind of the traditional way, which is mostly what we teach in here. But sometimes people take the opposite approach. And what I mean is they think, you know, a lot of people are going to be looking at this website and they're going to be using some kind of a mobile device, probably a phone, maybe a tablet or a smaller tablet. So there is a whole field of information on this and a whole idea that's called mobile or mobile first, where you plan out the design for your page as though everybody who looks at it is going to be looking at it on a mobile device. Then you scale it up and you worry about laptops and desktops and the other. Usually doing it that way is actually simpler than going down and doing it the other way, starting big and going to small. All right. There's all sorts of, I mean, some people look at it and say they'll do it one way, some people do it the other way. All right. So how to test for responsive design. All right. There's different ways that you can do this, but I want to show you one way. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring up a website here. See, I've got CNN.com right there. All right. So that's today's CNN.com page. Okay. And I'm going to right mouse click in an empty area over here, and I'm going to choose inspect. All right. This is it right here. And this is basically everything that makes up this page right here. All right. So what I just did was I brought up the developer tools. We talked about these a little bit earlier. We haven't looked at them in much depth or breadth of coverage. But what I want to show you is on here, up at the top, you'll notice there's two things. One of mine here is blue, and now it's not blue. But yours may or may not be blue, but if you click on it, now what I'm able to do is to kind of show what this is going to look like, this site, on different media. Notice this is how it would look on an iPad mini. All right. And if I click down here, I can choose, for example, an iPhone 12 Pro. And you notice it's a lot smaller now, which is what you'd expect. And they even show you right here what the dimensions are. All right. So this is one way. This is one way that you can test. Now, is it the only way? No. Is it the best way? Not really, but it's a starting point. What you'd like to do if you are creating a website for someone is you'd like to go and find as many browsers as you can and get as many fairly recent versions of that browser that you can. All right. And you want to test each one of those on phones, on tablets, on desktops, and on laptops. When you start thinking about that, that literally could mean that you're testing it. There could be hundreds of permutations. That is possible. All right. I mean, people typically don't go back. If you notice in here, there's no Internet Explorer, for example. So if somebody is using IE6, all right, we don't know what it'll look like on there. Not to be cruel, but we don't care. All right. These are the ones that we have available on here. All right. But it's really nice in that it gives you a starting point as to what your site will look like on these different devices. That's all I wanted to get across to you. So when they talk in here, this is what they're mentioning. It says, bring up the developer tools. All right. And again, I'm recommending that you use Chrome. If you don't, you can bring this up pretty much in just about any browser. All right. And as it says, after you test it with the developer tools, you'll of course want to test it on actual devices. But this is a start. So again, That's, what they did was I have my developer tools on the side. You can move it around. You can put it on the bottom like they show, on the top, on the left, on the right. You can even float it and like push it way the heck over here if you want to. But I just like to leave mine where it was. All right. So as it says, these are two ways that you can test a site for responsive design. One is to use the developer tools, and the other, I know people who are professional website designers, and if they are building a site, for a company, these are people who are contractual people. And if they are building a site for a company, they will go in and ask, do all of your employees use the same type of computer? And oftentimes the answer is yes. And if that's the case, they'll say, okay, then I want it written into my contract that while I'm working on this website for you, I have use of one of those computers. And that's the site they'll typically use to build it with. Because if people are typically going to be using a laptop, let's say, and it's going to be a particular type, all right, that doesn't mean that you don't care about phones and other devices, but if you know that's the one they're going to be using most often, that's the one you should be using when you're actually building the site. All right, so to bring it up, this is exactly what I just told you right here. All right. All right, so the next thing they start getting into then is fluid design. And again, as I mentioned, very simplistically. For a fixed design, you're typically working in pixels, which are PXs, or points, which are PTs. When you work with a fluid design or a fluid layout, it is designed to adjust to your screen size. So rather than you using pixels and points, you will typically use Ms or rems or percentages. All right. And as you're working on this stuff, it's not like there's necessarily a right or a wrong way to do it. And what I mean is, if you're going to use a fluid layout, a lot of people use percentages whenever they can. And they very rarely, if ever, use rems and Ms. All right. And if that works for them, cool. Other people believe it in it the other way. All right. So as it says here, figure 8.3 will show you settings for comparable fixed and fluid layouts. It assumes a screen size that's 960 pixels. But again, that is a fixed screen size. All right. So as you can see, as it says there, the header and the footer occupy the entire width of the page. The main content takes up 600 pixels. The sidebar takes up 360. When you add them up, it's 960. On the other hand, then they work with fluid, and notice they're only using 90% of the page. And that's a little fudge factor or whatever you want to call it as you adjust the size of the page. So as it says, the page will fill just 90% of the screen. All right. But then you're still working with 100% inside of that 90%. As it says there, note the percentages are relative to the size of the page, not to the size of the screen. And it gets a little bit weird when you look at that, but I think at least a good starting point is this picture right here. Now, in they're saying is if this was a fixed, it would be 960 pixels. If it was fluid, it would be 90% of whatever you're using to look at it. But that fixed width is 960 pixels, and it does not matter what kind of device you're looking at. And 960 pixels on a small smartphone would be ridiculous. All right. But 90% on a small smartphone, you should be able to adjust. All right. So as it says in there, you're using 90%, but then you're like, well, what is this 100%? That's 100% of that 90%. All right. So this is 960 pixels, 100%. You can see the other numbers that are in there. There are even formulas, and they will talk about them in this chapter for adjusting, going from fixed to fluid. All right. Now, almost every year before the semester starts and we get new students, someone will ask me, they'll say, do we have to do math to be in this program? And the answer is, in this case, for example, yes. You have to at least understand how to convert from one format to another format. All right. So as they say there on the bottom of the page, the benefit is it will automatically adjust to the size of the screen on the device you're using. And again, fixed are absolute, fluid are typically going to be percentages. All right. And like I said, somewhere in here, they show an example. Here we go. How to convert from fixed widths to fluid widths. Now, this is nothing you'd ever have to go and put on a test, but the idea here is it is not at all inconceivable that when the website for a company was first created, all right, that what happened was it was created using a fixed width type of format. And now the company wants to go and change, so it's a fluid width format. All right. Now, when you start to think about this, there's different ways that this can be done. What do I mean? What some companies do is they build one website, and that website it'll be built using fluid widths, and it will adjust. So it doesn't matter if you're using a phone or a desktop, it'll always look pretty nice. Other companies have taken the idea, they're building two different websites. They build one website that is more fixed in nature. In other words, it's designed to be used on a bigger medium, like either a laptop or a desktop. All right. And they build another one that's designed for mobile devices. In fact, a lot of times when you do that, what you'll notice is it'll have pretty much the same name, but with one of them, it might very well have like an underscore M in it, meaning again that it's being used for mobile. All right. Now, as an example, and it's nothing that you're going to be able to really look at, but maybe you've done this already yourselves. I don't know. All right. But if I go in, I'm from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And when I go in and I want to look at the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel and I look at it online, all right, and I go in and I look at it on my phone, what used to happen on my phone is I'd get a file that would come up and it would be Journal Sentinel underscore M.com, meaning it was a mobile one. Whereas when I looked at it in here, so if I brought it up right here, I did not get a mobile site. All right. I did not get a mobile site. I got their regular site. But you'll notice that if I get this site, notice how is it responsive? I don't think so. All right. This does not look very good, to be honest with you. All right. And what does that mean? That means that when I look at it and I bring it up on a mobile device, there's a very good chance maybe there is another copy of it, a mobile one that's in it, because this is not very responsive. You saw that as opposed to in here. If I close this, all right, and again, this is CNN's site. If I make this smaller, it still looks nice. But even that, looking at it here, doesn't look totally responsive. All right, and there's a lot of different ways, again, that this stuff can be built. So they talk next about how to convert fixed to fluid. All right. And it says you can use the formula at the top of the next page. Let's take a quick look at it. We can bounce back if we need to. All right. So target divided by content times 100 equal result. What the heck does that mean? All right. So they're saying in here, when you look, again, they had started with 960 pixels right there. All right. Then they set the width, instead of 960, it's now set to 90%. and then they readjust each one of these. So now, as it says here, all right, we've got 930 divided by 960 times 100. All right, that's the target size. That's the 930. All right. In other words, when they started coming in here and figuring out these numbers. Now, again, look at this. I'm not saying you're totally going to understand it. I'm not saying you're not going to totally understand it. You will not have to do something like this on any hands-on test. You may be asked a question where you have to do some conversion on a written test. I don't really know. All right. And again, we will go over the example for the Halloween Superstore after the break today. All right. So we'll take a look at it. And as they say here, to convert, you divide the width of the element, that's the target, by the width of the parent, and then multiply that value by 100. We could spend a whole big period on this. After a while, I mean, I think it would probably confuse you more than help you. So go ahead and have a read when you get a chance on 258 and 259. But I wouldn't let that, if you say I still am having a problem with it, I wouldn't let that throw you too much is what I'm saying. All right. Now you may remember that when we come in here, and I'm just going to bring up whatever comes up here. I don't care what it is. I'm hoping there'll be some kind of a file that comes up. Let's see. No. All right, so let's bring one up. So I'm going to grab, we'll grab this blues one. I haven't looked at that one in a long time here in code, but I'm going to anyway. So I'm going to bring it up right here. So here it is, open with code, and here we go. Now, what you may or may not remember about this is when we start, we've got something that kind of looks like this. It may not be exactly what we saw because this is 3 years old. But if I come in here and I create a brand new page, so I'm going to come in here and I'm going to make a new page. I don't want it under JavaScript, so I'll put it down here. And I'm going to create a new page and I'm going to call it junk.html. Okay, so there it is right there. And then I come in here and I do this. I put in our exclamation point and hit tab. You will notice that once we do that is we get this line, which we've never really talked much about. That's what they'll talk about next in the book. Viewport is whatever media you are using to take a look at what you're working on. So in other words, the viewport could be, in my case right here, I'm looking at this through a laptop. If you're watching this and you're watching it on your phone, your viewport would be your phone. All right. Content equal width equal device width, initial scale equal 1.0. First thing is, this is between double quotes. Do not split this up into 2 lines. In other words, like say, oh, there's the comma, I'm going to hit enter here. That doing this can screw it up. It may work, it may not work. Because typically in most languages, if you've got something within the double quotes, you should not split it up over multiple lines, or if you do, you have to do something special with it. We'll get into some of that later. But where it says width equal device width, initial scale equals 1.0, the scale means 100%. 1.0. So we're using as much of the screen width as we can. All right, if we'd set that to 0.75, we'd be using 3/4 of whatever it is we're working with. And width equal device width is basically says the system will figure out the width of the device depending on the device we're using to look at this. And that's kind of what they explained in here. They probably do a much better job of it than I just did, but I tried to put it into English for you. All right. So as they say here, these units are based on the size of a viewport of the device. All right. On a mobile device, the viewport rather is usually the size of the screen. All right. Now, as they mention here, this is where it gets a little bit heavy. Each of these units is relative to the height or width of the viewport. So there are two things that we're going to see on the next couple pages. One is VH, which is viewport height. One is VW, which is viewport width. All right. So for the height, imagine that they took your screen and chopped it into 100 different pieces. All right. Each one of those pieces, as you stack them up, would be 1/100th of your height or 1/100th of your width. All right. So you can set things accordingly. They give an example here. This says if your viewport is 600 pixels wide, then 1 VW would be equal to 6 pixels because 6 times 100 equals 600. And if it's 800 pixels tall, then 1 VH would be equal to 8 pixels for the same reason. Now, when you work with these, you can also set these yourself. As it says, you can set a Vmin and a Vmax. The Vmin, as it says, will correspond to the smallest dimension, not the smallest width or the smallest height, but the smallest of those two. The Vmax will be the largest, not of the height, not of the width, but the larger of the two. So if you had the same width and the same height, all right, if they were the same, then your Vmin and your Vmax would be the same. And again, they show an example in here. It says the first two examples show how these work. In the first example, the width is set to 95 VW. This means that the width of the body is going to take up 95% of what it can. All right. In addition, the left and right margins are set to auto. So the body will automatically be centered in the viewport. Technically, what's supposed to happen then is we should have 2.5 VW on the left, 2.5 VW on the right type of an idea. All right. Then it says the screens in this example show how the page appears when the viewport is this size. All right. Then there's another example where they work with 95 VM. So let's take a look at the examples. As always, what we have right here is as they typically do in a Murag book, is they give you a table that tries to explain these. Then they say, okay, notice in here, there's our HTML. What we're talking about now, it really isn't very HTML dependent, but what it is it is very CSS dependent. All right. And again, as you go through this, notice they're saying that the width is 95%. So in other words, this should be taking up 95%. All right. And you can see when you start making it smaller that it'll come in there and it'll change the way that the lines are distributed. Then in this one, this again was 95 VW. And now notice they're using Vmin there. All right. The only way that this is going to make any sense to you is if you sit and play with it a little bit. All right. Just looking at pictures, I don't think is really all that helpful. All right, let's push this over to fonts then. So one of the things that we're going to talk about right now, and if the book doesn't do it right here, I'm going to do it, and that is the difference between EMS, EMS, and REMS, REMS. All right. So it says in chapter 4 of this book, they recommended that you use relative measurements for your font size. In other words, when you are setting font sizes on your web pages, do not use pixels and points. Rather use percentages or use EMS or REMS or some kind of combination thereof. Now it says The reason for doing that is the size of the font is going to be relative to the parent. And again, what the heck does that mean? Well, again, I just typed in M's versus REMs, what's the difference? All right. And here, what is the difference between an M and a REM? REM, a CSS unit that is relative to the font size of the HTML element. M, a CSS unit relative to the font size of the parent element. So what the difference between those is are you doing it basically? Let's suppose, for example, that I've got some kind of a setup where I've got, let's say, paragraph, and then in the paragraph I've got something else, maybe a list or whatever, like an unordered list after that. All right. If I'm using REMs or Ms, the difference is going to be, all right, as it says, with an M, it's relative to the font size of the parent. So by default, it should be set, if I'm using an M, to the font size of the paragraph that was above it. All right. On the other hand, if I'm using a REM, then typically I've set the font size at the top of the program, and it'll basically cascade down and be used for everything. All right. And again, I may have brought this up to you before. I really and truly don't remember, but you'll notice here it says, how does REM differ from M and CSS? Stack Overflow. Again, this is Stack Overflow. If I have not mentioned it to you before, for lack of better words, it's kind of like Facebook for geeks. All right. You can go and sign up in here. You can ask questions, etc. Be very leery, because if you ask a question that people consider to be very simplistic, all right, because I did it once and was called a dummy right inside of here. All right. It was like, that's a really stupid question. You should know how to do this. Other times, if you're asked to do something, quite often when you will be asked to include your source code so people can see it. So they've got a demo in here. All right. It says, I sometimes seen developers use REMs, sometimes Ms. I try to see what it actually does, but what's it relative to? So here's an entire example. All right. So you'll notice, what do we have in here? We've got a div that's just got hello world in it. It's got hello and then a paragraph with world in it. All right. Then we've got a div and it says the div is 1.4 rem and the div P is also 1.4 rem. All right. And then they'll just go again. I guess that's not a very good example. All right. But notice this is it right here. M's are relative to whatever parent is holding this. REMs are relative to whatever you set at the top of your program. All right. REMs typically are more consistent. That does not mean that you still cannot come in and change a font size, whether it's REMs or whether it's M's. All right. I use REMs most often. I know other people who do this for a living who use M's more often. And at times, at least, what's going to happen is it's just a matter of personal preference, which one you use. All right. So let's look at the example here. It says, to illustrate, figure 8.6 starts by presenting the HTML for a web page. Then the CSS sets the font sizes for the elements. Here, the base font size for the body is set to 100%. Again, we're using a percentage in there. All right. 100% typically is the same as 1M, just so you know that. Okay. It says, although both of these result in the same font size, it's often going to be done as a percent. Then it says the font size for H1s are 1.75. What does that mean? Well, that means that if I multiplied that by 100, all right, that rather than this being 100%, the font size for H1s are going to be 175%. For H2s, they'll be 150%. For H3s, it looks like they'll be 112.5%. All right, and it says, as a result, all three of these will be larger than the base font. Plus, they've gone in and they've set the paragraph size to 0.75 ems. What does that mean? All right, that rather than it being 1 em, it's 75% of 1 em. All right. And when we go through and take a look at it, again, this is just nothing in here. It's all in here. We're setting the font size. What does that mean? Font size 100%. That means by default, it should be 100% of its regular size. But any H1 should be 175%, any H2 150, etc. And any paragraph should be 75%. So you'll notice this is the only place we've got a paragraph in here. In fact, let's see, all our lectures will be the second Wednesday. All right. So this is saying here, and I'm trying to look at it to make sure I'm telling it to you correctly. All right, so when we look at it here by default, our unordered list, for example, these ULs, they're not hired or handled here. So they should be at 100%. All right. And the H1 that we have here, this season's guest speakers, all right, that's at 175%, etc. All right. Now I'm looking at this, and the only thing I'm confused by is right here where it says that's a paragraph, but it's a paragraph inside of an aside. All right. It's a paragraph inside of an aside. What we're told down here is it's only footer paragraphs that should be 75%. So you can see that text is smaller, but this text is in an aside. This paragraph, since we don't have anything in here in our CSS that says be 100%. So in other words, the text size here is the same as the text size here. And you can tweak with this stuff all you want to or need to do. So as it says here, when you use ems or percentages, the size you specify is relative to the parent. That's why a lot of people like to use that. The difference, again, is when you use rems, it's relative to whatever you set at the top. All right. And again, maybe that's not the greatest of explanations. There's a lot of really good articles online, probably, that would explain it better than I did. And as I mentioned earlier, my guess is if you look through here, you're probably going to find some very good stuff in here as well. All right. So the next thing that's discussed in here, let's go through this, then we'll take our first break. And these are scalable images. All right. It says in figure 8.7, they're going to show you how to do scalable images. It says this figure presents part of a web page that includes a section with a scalable image. To make the image scalable, we set the maximum width to 100%. What that means is you typically will put your image into a container, a paragraph, a div, or whatever. All right. If we set the max width property to 100%, that means the image will be as wide as whatever it is that is holding it, the paragraph, the div, or whatever. All right. Now, one thing you don't want to do, and I'm guilty of it, is when you use a scalable image, you shouldn't display it larger than its native size was. What does that mean? That means that, for example, if I were to come in here and let's just say I go back to CNN.com here. All right. And let's grab this image right here. So I'm going to do a file and I'm going to say save image as, and I'm just going to save it to my desktop. All right. So it's example.jpg right here. And what is it? Oh, it's that's escaped, that guy who escaped. So there it is right here. All right. If I put my mouse over it, it says right now the size of this is 960 by 540. So let's look at that. You can open it up in Paint and you'll notice the size. All right. So it is 960 pixels wide, and I think it was 540 pixels high. Now, if I want to go in there and scale this, I can go in and click on resize. And if I click over here, I always use pixels for this, but it says right now it's 960 by 540. And you'll notice if I change that, let's make it half the size it was. So if I make this 480, the other one automatically scales. And boom, now it looks like this. And it still looks pretty good. However, if I come back here and I do this again, and what was it originally? It was 960. All right, it still looks fine. But if I come in here and resize it, and let's say that I make it 1500, for example, it typically starts to look a bit grainy the bigger that you make it. So when you make an image that's bigger than the size it was originally, all right, when you make it bigger than the size that it was originally, it'll start looking grainy. It's not a warning or anything else. But it does remind me of one more thing I wanted to show you. Maybe we'll take our break in a minute. But there's a couple sites here, and there are plenty of these that I'm going to show you right now. There are plenty of these, but I'm going to show you a couple of them. All right, one of them is called Pexels, PEXELS.com. All right, and what is it? At least half the photos on here are free. So if I came in and let's say I was doing a website and it was on dogs, okay, just as an example, okay, and I thought, wow, I like some of these pictures. Many of them, there's no cost for. So let's say I grab this one and I click on it. What happens is it says it's free to download, and I can click here and it says the original size was pretty doggone big. No pun intended. Pretty big. 3648 by 5052. But I can also have it scale for me automatically to large, medium, or small. Or I can even customize it. All right, so let's just say I choose small here and I tell it to download. All right, it will download it and it'll put it on my screen. If you do that, typically what you'll be asked to do is in your alt tag for the image, you would add this to it. So you'd say picture of a dog, photo by Dominica, whatever it is. Now, do you have to do that? No, but it's considered, again, good etiquette to come in there and do that. And hopefully now, if I go in here into my downloads, there it is. All right, so I could come in and modify it or do whatever I wanted to do for it. And if I put my mouse over it, it says that the size is 640 by 886, which I believe is the size I asked for. So I can come in and do things in here. All right. But again, that's one of the ones. And the other one is, I believe, the other one other than Pexels, I think it's Unsplash, not Splash, Splash.com, which will do pretty much the same thing. Now, some of the pictures that are in here, if you want to use them, you can't download them without paying a fee. I would never ask you to do that. But all I'm saying, so if I come in here and do the same thing, and I type in dogs, there may be some of the same pictures. There may be some different pictures in here. All right. But it's a nice place to start to look for free images. All right. Or normally free images. All right. It is 9:03. So rather than going on right here, okay, we are, But rather than doing that, let's just stop right now and let's take a 12-minute break, please, until 9:15. We'll pick it up and we'll finish the chapter hopefully at that time. Play game. All right, it is 9:15, so I'm going to start back up again. We're on how to scale images, and we've started looking at it. And as I mentioned, as they say here, you shouldn't try to make it larger than the size that it was originally. All right. Now it says when you use small images like logos, you may also want to include a minimum width property. So it says that way the image won't get so small that you can't see what it is. I mean, an example of that too is, for example, when we look here, these are the favicons right here. And that's pretty small as it is. Typically, the smallest that those will get will be like 16 by 16 or something like that. All right. It says some developers also like to set the height property to auto when they scale images. That way, basically what they're saying is make the height automatically scale to whatever the width is. All right, but it is the default, so you don't need to use it if you don't want to. But that said, some people still like to put it in there anyway. All right, so again, I mean, you can see, hopefully, it says here, part of a web page with a fluid layout that includes a scalable image. Well, you would want this to change. In fact, you may want it even to change, and sometimes you will see this as a site becomes more responsive and you want to put it on a phone, for example, there might be one or more images that even get eliminated. You don't show them on a smaller device, all right? And it might be because they're just so intricate that they wouldn't display well on a smaller device. There may be other reasons, all right? So again, you'll notice what they're showing in here. As it says, to create a scalable image, you remove any height and any width from the HTML for the image. What that means is, and we've started talking about this before, you should never, ever, in your HTML itself, you should never, ever set the size of an image, not in the HTML itself. Some people will set it inside of the CSS. The problem with setting it to a size inside of even in the CSS is it's then a fixed size. So if you are going to use that, you typically will want to go this route here, where you maybe give it a max width, maybe you don't, but the idea is you're using percentages in here to try to make it scale. As we said, this is the second part of what we wanted to put in here. So we've talked a little bit about fluid layouts, and now we're talking about scalable images. All right. So as they mention here, the next page that's here is going to show fluid design. And please remember, you have these. So what? This is chapter 8. So if I go out here and I go out, let's just go out to the one that I sent you at the beginning of the semester. All right, I gotta remember where it is, but I think it's in here. AWD1000 for all 2023 students. So you got sent that. So I'm going to go into HTML, CSS, and I'm going to go into, I think it's student download. And I think it's either book apps or book examples. I always get those confused. So this is chapter 8. All right. And I don't know which one this is, but the point is what they're starting to get to in here is they're starting to get to different things. And I don't know if this one, I'll just pick one. All right. And I don't know if it'll be actually totally scalable, etc. But it looks like it somewhat is. You can see that things are changing based on the size of the screen. All right. And again, that's what this chapter is all about. So it says this next figure will present a web page with fluid design. That means the widths are set to percents. The images are scalable. We have not talked about media queries yet. We will in just a bit. As a result, it says if you open the page in a browser and then change the width of the browser window, the page should then adjust. All right. Now notice they say in here, when you study the CSS for the figure, you'll see that the font sizes are set to M's. All right. Keep in mind that the font sizes won't change when the width of the browser changes because it'll be scalable is what they're saying. All right. Now, it says in this figure, the width of the browser window has been reduced, but the font sizes haven't changed. We will look at that when we get to media queries in just a bit. All right, so this is what they have in here. All right, so this is the one. I don't know which one this is exactly. It looks like Chapter 8 Fluid. Let's see if we can find that one. So maybe it isn't this one. Maybe it's the other one. There it is. Chapter 8 Fluid, Town Hall. So that's this is the same one that they're showing in the book. All right, there it is. There it is. There's the index page. And the other one that I think that we're looking at is this Samson. So notice if we start making this more narrow, all right, you can see that it's adjusting, which is exactly what we'd want it to do. Now, what isn't adjusting? Well, look at the size here of our heading. The size of the heading has not changed. What has changed is basically the way it's laid out on the page. But on the other hand, you'll notice that the size of the image does change. All right. So what's changing in here? Basically the size of the image and the shapes of some of this stuff. But if you look in here, if we look, for example, at this paragraph right here, as I make the browser window smaller, the paragraph size is not changing. All right, we're using M, so it is remaining constant. We'll change it in just a couple minutes, all right, when we bring in media queries. So I don't want to read to you, but when you do take a look at this, what they're saying is, okay, the logo has been scaled and the picture has been scaled. In other words, anything that's image related in here has been scaled. In addition, even though we haven't scaled any font size, you'll notice that since we're using M's, the system is doing the best that it can to try to look as good as it can look on a page. All right. Now, one thing that's poor about this is when we do look at it, you'll notice this become a member. When we make it small enough, it starts to look pretty poor. The get tickets and become a member, these are kind of bleeding into one another. So we probably would want to go in at that time. And there's two ways of handling that. All right. Sometimes what people do is they just make this really, really small. The problem with doing that and making it really, really small like that, and not trying to be funny, because I guess I'm guilty of it, is some people have fat fingers. So if this was on a phone and you make these too small, it might be hard for a person to choose that. The other way that people sometimes do this is they create what's called a hamburger menu, which means that these will stack. So you'll have home here, then underneath that you'll have speakers, then underneath that you'll have get tickets, etc. Now I don't know because I don't remember this, if in this one that's what they did in here or not. So this is media queries. This is the same one. So let's bring this up again and let's notice how it looks. So this, they're using the slick nav bar. And notice, there it is. And they're doing a little coloring as well. And when you get to a certain point in here, that nav bar will go away and it'll go back to a regular menu. All right. Okay, so let's keep going on then. So the HTML for the page says, if you were to compare this code with the same page in chapter 6, you'd notice two differences other than the addition of a navigation menu. First, the widths of the images in the header have been omitted. Okay, we just talked about that. That way we scale them ourselves using CSS. Second, it says the sequence of the aside and the articles have been switched. All right. Why does that matter? Because watch what happens in here. All right, there it is. Okay. But notice when we make it smaller, all right, we've got our choice basically. We can move that down to the bottom, and probably, since that's an aside, that's probably a good thing to do. If for some reason we wanted to highlight that, we could put that on the top and move this down. All right. Remember, you're the person in charge here. If you are creating this for someone, of course, they'll tell you, no, we want this here, we want that there. But otherwise, you're in charge. Okay. All right. So again, there's the HTML. Not really very many changes. And you should be able to look at that HTML, and at least ideally, it should make sense to you. So again, as you're going through this, I would strongly suggest that if it's the end of the period and you're like, I'm just totally confused everything he said, I'd start with this. And I'd go through as much of this as you have time to go through. It's not really that long. All right. Then I'd start to go through some of the examples that are in the chapter. Then I would go back and look at the one that we're going to work on in just a bit with the Halloween Superstore. All right. Then I would go on from there. All right. So next, again, they show the CSS for the page. Now I should go back and say this because they mention here, it says the width for the body is 96%. Now, did they pull that number out of the air, or what did they do right here? All right. They don't really explain how they came up with that number. They just came up with that number. All right. It says the max width property for the body is set to 1200 pixels. So it won't expand beyond the screen of a widescreen monitor. What does that mean? All right. 1200 pixels is basically the way that it's set up for most laptops and desktops. All right. It says the comments that will show the calculations that they used. As the page was originally defined at 990 pixels, all right, it says, for example, the width of the elements is calculated by dividing its width by 990. And then notice, as they mentioned there, there's two exceptions. All right. And there's always going to be exceptions in here. And typically the things that you're going to work with that are going to be involved with the most exceptions are going to be, what is a web page? More than anything else, it's text and images. And you want to make those two work together as well as possible. All right. Finally, it says there, to complete the fluid layout, the images are scalable. The max width is set to 100%. All right. Second, the width property is set to a percentage, and its max width is set native to its native width, original width in pixels. All right. So again, when we come in here, you start to see, with you look at the stuff in mustard and you look at the comments that are in here, they're explaining what happened. All right. Now I will go back. I promise you I will do this by next week. And that is, I'll go back and I'm going to look at, like, for example, your next test. I don't think there's anything at all that you have to do with any kind of working like this and converting from a fixed to a fluid. I don't believe I've never given a test that's had anything like that in it. All right. So the next thing that's in here, and I'm looking for something. Let's see. Darn it. What happened here? All right. I'm going to quickly start a search in here for something, because I made something from a class that I took online, and doggone it. Let's see. I thought it did a really good job of, oops, I don't want to do it in there. There's, so we're going to look for that. All right, so the last part of this is the use of media queries. And as I mentioned to you earlier, this is going to sort of start to get us into the world of programming, because one of the things that we're going to look at in here are what are referred to as breakpoints. And what a breakpoint is, unfortunately, next semester, those of you that take the C# class will learn about breakpoints, and they mean something totally different. But in here, it's where does this break? In other words, when we go from here, and you can see it start to change, boom, you can see there was a change right there. See that? It went from not showing or showing the hamburger menu here where it says menu to, oops, to making it a little wider and not showing it. There was a breakpoint right there. All right, there might have been another one in here someplace else. I don't know. Looks like those were that was the main one that was in here. All right. So it says we're going to use media queries to control the layout of the page at various widths. And one of the things I wanted to show you, and I had done a search, but I realized when I did the search earlier, I spelled the thing I was looking for incorrectly. All right. But what we're going to do is we're going to bring up a very, very simple example to start walking through this in just a bit. All right. It says we'll also learn how to build a responsive menu using the jQuery plugin called SlickNav. Now, what is jQuery? We're going to talk about that. What is SlickNav? I kind of showed it to you already. And that is, again, when we looked in here and we made this smaller, all right, we got it to a certain point. That is the use of SlickNav right there. This is typically called the creation of a hamburger menu. What the reason they got hamburger is if you look at the 3 dashes there, the idea was it sort of looked like a hamburger on a bun. I didn't make that up. All right. But the idea is using this, once you get down to a certain width, if we didn't do this, we'd either have to stack these or we'd have to do something like this. All right. Now, in a few weeks from now, I don't know how many, 2 or 3 weeks from now, we're going to be looking at something that's called Bootstrap. And when we look at Bootstrap, it'll really automate a lot of the stuff that we're doing in here as far as using that SlickNav. All right. I don't know why these guys are so hung up on SlickNav. There's nothing wrong with it, but there's better ways of doing it than the way they show it. All right. As it says, you need to configure your viewport appropriately for mobile devices. That was the idea that I mentioned to you about this mobile or mobile, depending on how you pronounce it, first. So as it says, on a mobile device, the viewport can be larger and smaller than the visible area. All right. And you wanted, when you were doing responsive design, you want things to change based on, whether you're looking at it on this machine right here or whether you're looking at it on a phone, bottom line. So as it says, when you use media queries, you want to make sure that the web page isn't reduced. All right, we're reducing the stuff on the page, not the page itself. All right. In the meta element, you've already seen this. We talked about it a little earlier. The name attribute is set to viewport to indicate that it applies to the viewport. So this is the same stuff I mentioned to you before. Take a quick read on it. If you don't like the explanation I gave, that's the one the author has. Now, they do mention there's other things that you can add in here. If we look right here, it says, as an example, when you use responsive website design, you might want to set the user scalable property to no. What does that mean? If you do that and you've got it set up like that, as an example, that means if somebody's looking at it on their phone, they can't pinch. If you've ever done that to like zoom in or zoom out, you're not allowing a person to do that. All right. There may be a reason depending on the quality or depending on what you're using the website for, that you might want to prohibit someone from doing that. All right. So again, You want it to look more like this, but you don't want it to look like this. All right. So these are some more of the things that are in here. Hopefully the width and the height just make sense. The logical width of the viewport in pixels, the logical height of the viewport in pixels. Okay. Initial scale, as it says, it indicates the initial zoom factor. All right. Again, by having us set that to 1, it's 100%. All right. Minimum, as it says, it's a minimum zoom factor. Maximum is a maximum zoom factor. And we already mentioned the scalable, that you can set that to no so you can't pinch, etc. All right. So that's what everything in here means. I'm not going to read any of this because we've talked about it before. There very well may be one or more questions on your written test for chapter 8 that go into this and ask you what this stuff means. I really don't remember. All right. So notice the first thing, media queries are a CSS feature. That means that media queries will appear in the CSS file, not your HTML file. All right. They let you write conditional expressions within your CSS code. Okay, what does that mean? If something is conditional, you are asking a question. If a certain set of criteria is true, you might do one thing. Otherwise, you might do nothing. Or if a certain set of criteria is true, you might do one thing. Otherwise, you might do another thing. So it just depends on when you write how you write these. All right. And if that confuses you, that's what the JavaScript, very much of the JavaScript class will be about. All right. Okay. So it says figure 12 shows you how to code the media queries for a responsive design. Okay, so let's go back to that, look at that, and then we'll come back to here. All right. This is the syntax for it, but let's look at one. All right. In fact, let's take a look at each one of the 4 that are in here. Okay. Quite often, in fact, almost all the time when you use media queries, it's going to say media only screen. And what that means is you don't care about setting the size of things when you're printing it. You only want it when people are looking at it on the screen. All right. So this says max width of 796 pixels. That means whatever you put in here, this ... just means you'd add something in there. So whatever you were to add inside of there would apply if the screen width was 1 pixel, which isn't really even possible, through 796 pixels. All right. So we've got a max width, but you'll notice in this first example, we don't have a min width. We do in the second one. So this says if you've got a width on your screen that is between 481 and 796 pixels, you will do this. If it's less than 481 pixels, you'll do something else or nothing. If it's greater than 796 pixels, you'll do something else or nothing. All right. You can use ranges. So this one here, media only screen and width less than or equal to 796. This one is basically this one. All right. This one is basically this one. So there's 2 ways that you can write it. Writing it the second way where you've got the less than equal to this, less than equal to this, etc. That is much more programmatic in nature because you're giving it a range. You're saying that the width must be greater than or equal to this, and the width must be less than or equal to this. And again, if that doesn't make sense, this is what we'll be going over as we go on here. So the media query, as they mentioned, you use the CSS at media selector, as you can see right there. It specifies the media type. All right. And as it says, each conditional expression can check different properties. The screen size at which it changes from one thing to the other is called a breakpoint. All right. And with CSS Media Query Level 4, we can now write things more like this that are more programmatic in nature. Now, if we go back up to the top and look at this, this is all the stuff that you can put in here. So you need the at media. You typically will put in there only screen, but there are different media types that you can use. All right. And again, on here, I went back a page. All right. They're just basically explaining everything that I just explained. So I didn't have to sit and read it out of the book. All right. How do you determine the breakpoints for media queries? The good news is, technically, you don't have to. And if we go through this, you'll see hopefully what I mean. As they say, there are many different devices used today. All right. Some people still use, I see that commercial for Jitterbug and some of the other things where some people still use the old flip phones. All right. Now there's those new flip phones that are coming out, which is basically like you take your standard type of phone and you can open it up and it's now double the width that it used to be. All right. So it says you need to determine the breakpoints for a page based on content rather than screen size. To do that, as it says, you can use the developer tools. All right, but you don't have to go that far if you don't want to. What do I mean? I don't know if they show that in here or not. I know they talk about it sooner or later. All right. For example, in here, you'll notice here they say that the window can only be reduced to 500 pixels. There are natural breaking points that when you go from one medium to another medium. What do I mean? Well, I'm going to jump ahead to something we're not going to talk about yet for a couple weeks, but I want you to see this. I'm going to go out to getbootstrap.com. Hopefully I spelled that correctly. Looks like I did. All right. And I don't know if it's in the documentation. Let me do a search in here and see if I can find breakpoints. Notice there's the media queries. All right. Now, when we get to that point, we're going to use this, meaning that's a small device, a medium device, etc. But this is the breakpoint. So an extra small device, an extra small one probably would be like a flip phone or whatever, that would be less than 576 pixels. A small device would be between maybe 0 or really 576 pixels and maybe 767. A medium device would be between 768 and 991. A large device would be between 992 and 1199, etc. Hopefully that makes a little bit of sense to you. Those are typically natural breakpoints. And what I mean is usually 576 to 768 is going to handle most phones. All right. Usually 768 to 992 will handle most tablets. And usually 992 to 1200 will handle most laptops and desktops. Are there exceptions? Of course there are. All right. But by and large, that's the kind of thing that you're going to end up using. All right. Now they talk about doing that by going in through the developer tools, and you can. You can go in through the developer tools and you can look at it. You've already seen this. We already went in here and we saw what it would look like on different devices. You saw, for example, we had the iPad mini. All right. You can bring up a regular iPad in here, etc. And you don't have to just use iPads. I noticed there was a Surface Pro in there and there were other things. So you can look at some of the numbers when you do that. All right. The next thing that's discussed in here is, again, building that hamburger-like menu with the Slick Nav plugin. The good news is you implement it by adding it All right, you implement it by adding it to your file. You don't have any coding that you have to do. I'm going to check something now to see if, for my own edification, to see if I'm right or not here. And I'm going to put it here. Okay, now there is a site that this is one of those things that as a developer, you're going to learn about and you're going to end up using it a lot. So let me put it right underneath the other one here. And it's pretty simple. And again, you don't need the HTTPS, but it's cdnjs.com. CDN is an acronym. It stands for Content Delivery Network. All right. What you can do when you go out to the site cdnjs.com is you can type in a lot of stuff. What does that mean? That means, for instance, I want us to be able to use the latest and greatest Slick Nav. All right. And you'll see it found it. It says responsive menu plugin for jQuery. Now I can click here and that'll copy the URL, or I can click right here, which is what you'll usually do. And I can copy the link tag. Why did I do that? Well, notice now, if I go back, I'm going to go back to one of my files. It's whatever I've got open in here. All right. So I've got this garbage one that I made previously, this junk. Now, if I paste that in and I'll come in and I will word wrap. What you'll see is it added this. This added the Slick Nav CSS file that I need in order to be able to use Slick Nav. Eventually, we'll go out there, and if we need something from Bootstrap, or we need something from jQuery, or we need something from Google Fonts, CDNJS is a great place to go because it's kind of a supermarket where you put in what you want, and it gives you the link to that. All right. So again, it's something that'll become even more and more important as we go on. cdnjs.com. All right. So as it says, when you develop a responsive design, you want the menu to work on a mobile device. You've already seen this. So again, there it is. So what have they done in here? Well, they've added the jQuery Slick Nav. Now, what they did here, you're like, well, why do you have that big thing and they have this? They copied the file in and just put it inside of their JavaScript directory. You can do that as well. When you use a CDN like that, a content delivery network, I am telling the system right now, when you are working with this, go out to the internet and go out to here and find this. What does that mean? That means I better have an internet connection if I want to use it. So if I'm stuck in a tunnel or I'm someplace that doesn't have internet, I could be hosed. So if instead of doing it this way, I did it the way the author showed, and that is I copied the file, then I could just use it at any time, whether I had an internet connection or not. All right. Now, you'll notice in here it says the HTML for the SlickNav plugin in the head element. Okay, that is HTML. Right there, that line, this line that's gray. This right here is not HTML. This is the first time probably that's JavaScript. All right, and I don't want to go into it in too much depth and breadth of coverage right now, but basically what they're saying is these lines that are right here says if we're using jQuery, bring in the Slick Nav menu. And if what we're using is a mobile device right there, use the Slick Nav. Otherwise, use the regular nav. All right. I can't put it any cleaner or clearer than that. So it may not make a lot of sense right now, but hopefully at least the idea is the more that we use it, the more sense it's going to make. At least that's my hope. All right. And again, you've heard me say this, you're probably bored hearing me say this. It's imperative that you're reading these chapters. I don't ever try to miss any point in a chapter that I consider to be important, but I might. I don't try to do it, but I might. All right. Now it says you can download the Slick Master zip file from here as well. It's just another place you're going out to GitHub to get it. It says unzip it and add the CSS, etc. to your website. Well, we'll follow what they tell you to do here, but I showed you another way you can get it as well. Add the HTML. So what we want to do in here, this may or may not make sense. All right. So if you want to hide this, if you want your regular menu to show, for the mobile menu, you'll want to say display none. All right. But if you want it to show, you'll say the mobile menu display block. And when you display the block, that'll say the regular menu will have a display none on it. And again, if that doesn't make sense, hopefully it'll make a little bit more sense when you see it in action. All right. I've said this to you many times before. That's how you learn. All right. So what they're going to do in the rest of the chapter here is they're going to go back to the same example that they looked at before, but the difference in here, the difference in the example is going to be now they are going to use responsive web design in here. So it'll be the same one that we looked at before. So in other words, and I may have even brought it up already, I don't know. I'm going to grab that in a second, but let me open up another one here. So again, this is the same, these are the same files that you have. So on my desktop in here, that is the AWD1000 fall 2023 students. All right, I'm going into the HTML, I'm going into the student download, the book apps, chapter 8, and the one with media queries. So if we run this, this looks the same as the other one did. Okay, in fact, we want the Samson one, I think it was called. All right. But the difference between this one that you see right here and the one we saw right there, they look the same. All right, this is the media query one also. So where is that one? This is not the media query one, and this is the media query one. You might notice this is a little bit bigger, it looks like. All right. But they're going to do the same thing. The difference is if we go into this one, we right mouse click and we view the source. All right. And then I come over here and I go to, let's see, it probably is going to be in here. I would think our speaker.css. That what you're going to see as we look and go down in here, it's kind of a convention that you put media queries down at the bottom, even down below the footer. So just get used to putting them way down there. So here are some media queries. All right, so again, the way that you have to look at this is if you've got a width that's between, all right, this is tablet right here. So if you've got a width that's between 0 pixels and 959 pixels, you'll want to do this. All right. If you've got one that's between 0 and 767 pixels, you'll want to do all of this. All right, and there's even more. If you've got one that's even smaller than that, you'll want to do this. And it doesn't matter the order in which you put them. Put the smallest one and go up or the largest one and go down. Because we're putting in here, basically, we're putting dimensions, for lack of better words, of where we want these things to break. All right. So as it says there, this is the same page you saw in 8.8 that we used the fluid layout, but now it uses media queries, so it works for all devices of all sizes. And it says to make this work, the Slick Nav menu has to be implemented as shown previously. So that's put in there. All right. So when we go through the example, at least I believe, when we go through the example in just a bit for the Halloween Superstore, we will do the same thing. As it says there, if you compare the appearance, you'll notice some differences. Everything is smaller on the phone, which you would expect. Second, the margin and border have been removed from the page. Why? Because again, the idea is with smaller devices, you want to be able to use 100% of your screen size when possible. Third, as it says, the logo is displayed above the heading. All right. And the headings are centered. It says when you go down to the bottom of the page, you'll see that the footer is centered as well. It's not that they had to do that. They're showing you some of the things that you indeed can do with media queries. All right. Then it says beyond that, Slick Nav is displayed for mobile phones. All right. And the content is displayed in a single column, kind of what we already talked about. So again, the idea is it should look nice now on any device. And I've said this before, but I do want to say it again. You'll notice in here in the body, we have two different navs. They must have two different names. We could make them classes if we wanted to, but they would have to have two different class names. Typically, it's done like this, two different IDs. And when one is turned on, the other one is turned off. All right. So again, as they mentioned in here, it basically is the same example we had earlier, but it uses media queries to change the page appearance depending on what you're using to look at it. The only change, as it says, to the HTML is the addition of the Slick Nav menu. All right, we'll look at that in just a sec. Because here's the CSS, and maybe they don't show it in here, I don't know. But this is the CSS for this, so there's more to it. All right. And you'll notice the way that it's set up in here. This is a time when it really can help for you to put some comments into your CSS. All right. And, you know, when you comment, and I may have mentioned this before, I may not have, it's not that it's a big thing, but there's two reasons that you comment. All right. For one of them, if you're working on a project and the idea is when you're done, you go on to another project, then someone may end up inheriting your project and maintaining it. So the more documentation you put into the project, the easier it'll be for them to understand it. Now, be real leery of the fact that if I took every line in my program and put a comment there, the program gets bigger, so it takes longer to load. But places, you know, my litmus test is, if you think it might need a comment, it probably needs a comment. All right. Some of you who've had me for other classes may have heard this before, but I went to work for an aerospace company. This was many years ago, but I was there for a week and I was sorry I took the job. It just was not a good fit. All right. But my wife was like, you know, they just paid $5,000 to move us, and you're staying there for at least a year, which is what I did. But the point is, for my first project, they had me basically implement an order system for them. All right. And they said, I said to them, well, what language do you want me to do this in? And they used multiple languages at this place. They said, what do you know? And I listed about a dozen languages. And they said, any one of them is fine. So I ended up picking up the one that I thought would be the easiest to use to implement this with. All right. But long story short, the whole application, I believe, was about 11,000 lines. Now, that's a lot of code. Now, out of those 11,000 lines, approximately 4,000 were comments. I took entire program runs, copied what was there, and put it in as a comment. The reason that I did that was I wanted the person who was going to end up working on this and, you know, maintaining it when I got done to be able to understand what it was. And when I got done, they did move me on to another project. And the guy who took over from me, his name was Mark Wilson. I said, Mark, does this make sense to you? He just laughed. And he said, with all the comments in here, What question could I have? All right. So, comments are a good thing. Let's leave it at that. So this is the CSS that we need in here. All right. And as I mentioned, in many ways, this is probably about as close as you can get to programming in here. All right. I've even read articles on this. HTML stands for hypertext markup language. And many people say, yeah, it's a markup language. It's not code that you put in. CSS stands for cascading style sheets. You know that already. But they say it's not really code you put in there. Well, media queries are about as close as you get. There's other things you can do. There's SAS and some other stuff we don't get into. All right. The chapter ends with talking in here, and we mentioned this a little bit earlier. It says, now that you've seen how to code a web page using desktop first, all right, it says, now you should start thinking about how to start with a smaller device in mind, mobile first. Which works better? It's an arbitrary decision. Many people will tell you that you should always do mobile first because it's harder. And it's much easier for you to up something and make it bigger and work on a big device than it is to downsize it, so to speak. All right. As it says there, most approaches should work. If you're working on your own, you can use the approach you prefer. A lot of people choose desktop first just because it is easier. All right. So again, everybody's different. Either way, as it says, you need to plan the components and layout for each page. That's one of the biggest problems I see people make when they do this stuff. They don't really exactly even have an idea of what it is they want to do. Rather, they just start writing code. All right. And again, no, that's not really the way you should do it. It says you also need to code the HTML, right? That's the hard work. When it's done, hopefully you get the results you want. Okay. So they go back in here and notice what it says. Figure 817 on the next page presents the CSS for the smallest viewports, ones that are under 383 pixels wide. That would be, like I said, an old-fashioned flip phone, something really, really small. All right. So when we look at it in here, typically what's going to happen, I thought they showed a picture, but again, since those devices are so small, you might totally get rid of any images you have. All right, because they just don't resonate well enough to take a look at them, as an example. Then they show the CSS for this as well. All right, I think that's it for the chapter. Yep. Okay, so let's go on. And I want to show you, we're going to do this in just a second, but I want to show you here. I'm just going to show you the author's version. Mine is not much different than the author's, but I just want to show you before we go on. I want to do two things before we take our next break. And the first is I'm going to literally just go up and go to the author's page for now. Okay, so this is what we're going to build. And again, it doesn't look any different from chapter 7 until we make it smaller. See the difference? You see it breaks again right there. That's really about the only place. But once it gets to a certain point, what's happening here? Well, notice we've got our nice menu here. We come down to there and, well, what happened? Well, first, it went down to the slick nav menu. Next, this stuff moved down to the bottom. We could have still centered this, so there's a lot of different things that you can do here. All right, but that's what we want. that truly is a responsive page. All right. And we can still, these pages aren't operational yet other than our homepage. All right. So that's what we plan on doing. And again, we'll start on that after the break. Before we do that, though, I want to see if I found that file I was looking for. Don't know if this is it or not. So let me try quick. That is it. Good. All right. This isn't going to look like much at all, but I want to run it for you and then I want to go over it with you. And again, it may not 100% make a lot of sense to you right now. That is totally fine. All right. But I'm going to run this. And you'll notice when you look at the HTML for this, because we're going to go over it, there's not a lot in here. 30 lines. All right. When you look at the CSS for this, all right, there's a style and there's a media queries. I think I used the media query one. We'll find out in a minute. But you'll notice there's a bunch of media queries. That's most of what this is. So let me run it for you. All right. And you'll notice it says widescreen and the screen is black. No biggie there. But what you'll notice is as we start making this thing, well, I've already ruined it, but as we start taking this and making it bigger and smaller, it's going to change sizes. So widescreen says that the screen has got a minimum width. I don't remember if it's 960 or what. Then we go down to normal. All right, from there we go down to tablet. From there we go down to smartphone. This was not meant for you to look at and go, oh, wow, that's the coolest thing ever. No, but the idea was it's meant to start showing you where we break, why we break. So let's go through the code that's in here, and then we'll take our next break. All right, I'm going to start with, as I said earlier, let's bring this up, and I will bring it up in code, in Visual Studio Code, rather. Okay. And again, here's the CSS file, and here is our index file. All right, so let's look at this, because it really and truly is pretty simple. All right. So taking it from the top, my hope is that by now, this makes sense. Now you'll notice line 6, you might say, well, we haven't looked at that before. You really can get away without using that anymore. What this line in here is saying, just an FYI, is, hey, if somebody for some reason is still using Internet Explorer, for lack of better words, pretend they're using Edge. All right, it's kind of a hack that got put in there. But by now, the doc type, the HTML line, all these lines in here should make sense. We went over this one a little bit today. Again, it was in your book. And we're going to be bringing in this style sheet, okay, which we're going to look at in just a minute. So what do we have in here? In our body, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different divs. All right, the first one is called widescreen, and it has an H1 in it that's called widescreen. You may or may not remember, I think that was the black one. Then we had one called normal. I think that was either the blue or the green, I don't remember. Then another one called tablet, and that was either green or blue. Then we had smartphone that was red. We didn't even look at the landscape. All right. But the idea is when you look at these, you're like, wait a minute, this doesn't make any sense. Well, if I did comment out, if I did come in here and actually comment out, bringing in the CSS file, and we save this, and we ran it, it's going to look a heck of a lot different. All right, that's it. That's all we put in there were those 5 divs. But what we said in the CSS is two things. First of all, take every single one of those divs and make them invisible. Don't show them. But using media queries, check the screen size. If the screen size is within a certain size, bring up the word widescreen in the center of the screen and make the background black. If our size is within the normal range, make it blue or green or whatever it was, etc. So that's what's happening through the magic, so to speak, of the CSS. But by itself, the HTML is doing virtually nothing. It's kind of a waste. So let's look at the CSS. All right. Well, we just set up a font family, no biggie there. The background color of gray, I don't think that's ever even really getting hit, but we're giving it a default background color and a default text color. We're telling it to align everything, and we're putting some padding at the top, because otherwise, if we didn't, where it's got normal, widescreen, etc., that'd be way up at the top of the screen. So we're pushing it down a little bit. Okay. So this is applying to everything. And we're telling it display none. Don't show any of the H1s. All right. But if our screen size is technically between 0, if it's technically between 0 and 500, make the background red. All right. Also take this thing that says smartphone and display it in block format. All that is it's the word smartphone. All right. Then if it's, notice, so this was 0 to 500 right here. If I'm between 501 and 768, which again is a typical size, this would right here would be for a small smartphone. This would really be, most people would, maybe that's a tablet size. Okay, 501 to 768. So if that's the case, blue and tablet. If it's between 769 and 1200, that's typically the size right here. Normal, which means using a laptop or a desktop. And if it's on some kind of a widescreen, then the media the width is 1200. So this is the same thing as saying that the width is greater than or equal to 1201. All right, so there's different ways you can write this. The point again in here is for you to notice, I did it smallest to largest. So in the smallest case, it will be red and it'll say smartphone. When it breaks the first time, so whether it's within these ranges here, it'll be blue and it'll say tablet. When it breaks again, when it's within this range, it'll now be green and say normal. And once it gets bigger than this value, it's going to be black and it's going to say widescreen. All right. Now I'll actually put this one out there later. All right. I'll throw it out there on a repo or do something with it. But what I wanted you to start to understand is this is about as simple as you can make things using media queries. Typically, there's going to be a lot more that you're going to do. All right. So it is 10:13. Let's take till 10:25. And at that time, at 10:25, we're going to come in and I'm going to grab, again, I'm supposing that this is my homework right here. And in chapter 8, all right, which is where we are. All right, we're just going to take a look at everything that's in there. This is the whoops, that's not it. I'm sorry. This is chapter 8. So this is the HTML. Again, it looks just like this, but right now we don't have any CSS implemented to make this responsive. So it's totally non-responsive. That's what we're going to do. I'll see you in 11 minutes at 10:25. And I will literally be back going to go out and just use the facilities. So I'll be back in a couple minutes. Oh, all right, it is 10:25, so I'm going to start up. As it says here in this exercise, will enhance the home page you worked on in exercise 7. So it uses responsive web design. Okay. So it says here, I'm just going to go over all the instructions because it's actually on 3 pages. All right. And then we'll start on it. So first it says to make a copy of the main.css style sheet and call it main_rwd.css. Then modify the HTML for the page so that it uses this style sheet instead of the other one. We'll do that first. All right. Modify the page so that it uses a fluid layout. The maximum width for this page should be 960 pixels, and the page should occupy 95% of the browser window. Be sure to make the left and right margins and padding as well as the structural elements fluid. Note it says to get the boxes to size properly, you'll need to specify the width of the UL element instead of the width of the LI elements. If you used pixels for any top or bottom margin or padding, convert them to Ms, okay? In addition, if you specified any of the font sizes using pixels, convert them to percentages or Ms. Make both of the images on the page scalable and make sure that both images are limited in size to the width that's specified in the HTML. In addition, make sure that the image in the header can't be reduced to less than 40 pixels. So really those two things are this image here and this image here. All right. For the media query, add a meta element to the page to control the viewport for the media queries. I think we already have that. Add a media query that will be applied to screens with a maximum width of 800 pixels. Then add styles to remove the background image from the page, remove the shadow from the body, and reduce the size of all fonts to 90%. Okay. Next, add a media query that will be specified for a maximum width of 767 pixels. All right, then add the HTML and CSS required, etc. And we want to put in the slick nav menu. Okay. Note the page shown here was captured on a desktop, so it's an approximation. All right. Finally, for a mobile phone, as it says right there, add a media query that will be applied to screens with a maximum width of 479 pixels, then reduce the font sizes in the header and the first heading section. All right, again, they're saying that that is just an approximation. So let's start. All right, so I'm going to bounce back and forth between here and what we actually have here. All right, so the first thing we're told to do is to go into our styles, and we're supposed to take this main and make a copy of it. So Control C to copy, Control V to paste. And then I want to change the name from main-copy to main_RWD. Okay, so that's first thing we want to do. All right, then I'm going, so that's the one we're going to work with. But did I open this up yet inside of? Let's close this. Yeah, I don't need to save that. And let's just open up what we're working on because it's good practice. So I'm going to open it up inside of code. All right, so chapter 8, open with code. There we go. So we now have in here, under our styles, we have both a main RWD and a main, and they're exactly the same as of right now. The next thing that we're told to do is to go back to our index file and change this because we don't want to use main CSS. We want to use main_RWD.CSS. And there's really two ways I could have handled that. One way is the way I did it right here. The other way is if we wanted to, I could just take this, make a copy of it, comment this one out, and then change this one to _RWD. And there really is no difference between them. All right. This is leaving the other one in there so I can at least see it. Okay. Now, hopefully one of the things that you'll realize in here is in our header that we have, what we have done is we have put a width in here. All right. And we're not going to want that in there, but I'm not going to worry about that right now. I'm going to try to follow the directions in the order that they were given to us. And we'll see if we can get this thing to work. All right. So make a copy. We did that. Modify the page so it uses the full layout. We did that. So we're up to here. The maximum width for the page should be 960 pixels. And the page should occupy 95% of the browser window. So it should have a width of 95%. Be sure to make the left and right margins and padding as well as the structural elements fluid as well. Okay, so we'll look at that in just a moment. All right, and then the thing to get the boxes, that's fine. Let's just start with this one right here. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just make a change, and then I'm going to see what it looks like, if anything, on my actual page itself. All right, in fact, let's close the page, and we will open it up, but we're going to open it up in live server. So I'm going to open with live server just to make sure it, okay. So right there, something's wrong. Okay, that's fine. I thought we called it main underscore RWD. That's good to know that from the beginning. So let me look. Main underscore RWD. Did I save that one? All right. Doesn't like something. Let's try it like this. I don't know why that would matter. It shouldn't. There's main RWD right there. Oh, looks like I put a space in there accidentally. That's on me. Let me rename this and get rid of that space. There. I had main space underscore RWD. Now it's been changed. Okay. So let me go back into here and change that as well. All right. Now let me do a file, save, and let's just be sure we'll also save this one. File, save. Now, when we look at it, it should come up and look the way that it did previously, and it does. All right, so it now is using the style sheet we want it to use, even though it's the same as the other one. So let's go in and start changing that style sheet. All right. In our body right now, what are we doing? Well, we got that Z index set. I don't know if that's going to matter or not. We've got a font family set. All right. Notice right now our width is fixed at 800 pixels. All right. We don't want that in there. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to come up here and we're going to say the max width. These are just following the specs in the book. The max width is 960 pixels. All right. And the width is going to be 95%. Right? So that's the first things that we were asked to do in there. All right. All right. And I'm looking in here, and I don't think there's anything else that we have to change in the body. All right, so let's do a file. In fact, before we save, let's look at it. There it is. All right, and let's do a file, save all. Okay, and I don't know if it really looks any different yet or not. It might be pushed up a little more to the top. I don't know. All right, but other than that, I think it pretty much looks the same way, but still, as you can see, not at all responsive. All right, but we've started. How's that? All right, so next we've got the H1, H2, and H3 in our paragraph with no margin. So again, all that's doing is it's turning off all of our margin and it's turning off all of our padding. That looks good. All right. But now when you look in here, all right, basically everything that we're doing in here that I've highlighted is using pixels. All right. And we're told to get rid of that. We don't want it to use pixels. All right. Now, is that big a thing? Not really, but we're going to fix it up a little bit anyway. So if I come in here, just so you know, there are 16 pixels. There are 16 pixels in 1M. It's not something I made up. It's just that's the way it is. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to go into my calculator and I'm going to say 15 divided by 16. And I get 0.9375 that you see right here. Okay, I'm just trying to let you see where I'm getting numbers from. So I'm going to change this from that to 0.9375 M. All right. And let's see. So that's 15 divided by 16. All right. And that's going to be the heading, the padding for the heading. All right. We also have, remember our size now is, didn't we change that up here? I thought we did. Max width is okay. So we want to use what? Trying to remember why I did this. And I think I went back and looked at what the author did, but the author had put here, because I didn't have it, 1.875%. Okay. And then there was a comment there that said that was 15 divided by 800 multiplied by 100. All right. I'm not going to be able to give you a better description than that because that's the one that they gave. All right. So we've added this. So what have we changed in here so far? We did not change anything in the HTML. I don't know if we're going to need the Z index or not. I don't have it in mind. So for now, at least, I'm just going to come in and I'm going to comment that line out. Remember, you write comments differently in here. Whoops. So I'm going to comment that out. We set this before was we didn't have any max width, I don't think, but we've got a max width now of 960 and a width of 95%. Okay, we didn't change anything else in here. We left that as it was. We changed that from 15 pixels to its equivalent in M's. All right, I'm going to leave this one. I mean, we're going to get a real small number otherwise. It's not going to hurt anything. Okay. Excuse me. So this has already been commented out, so I'm just going to get rid of that. So what's next? We've got this header image. Right now it's floating left, and it's got padding right of 1 rem. Now, I'm not using M's, I'm using rems. All right. And again, we're going to use that same number that we had here. And that number again was from this. It was from 15 divided by 800 times 100. All right. So I'm going to use this. I'm going to change that number from rem to M, and I'm going to put the same thing in there, 1.875%. I could copy the same comment, but you can see it right there. All right, so that's the first thing we're doing. Then we're going to play around with the width in here as well. All right, and the width, remember, this is our header. So that is this. We don't want that in here anymore, because by setting it to 85, we're giving it a fixed width. We don't want that. So I'm removing that width from our index.html file, which means I want to set it in here. So I'm going to set the width to be 10.6% of the size of my header. That's the width. I'm going to give it a max width. Whoops, I'm sorry. That should be lowercase. I don't know how I hit the uppercase, but I did. All right, I'm going to give it a max width of the same thing we had it set before in our HTML, and that is 85 pixels. Now, if I don't want it to be 85 pixels, again, I can come through here. Whoops. I can come through here and I can say 85 divided by 16. My fault. Try that again. 85 divided by 16. And it's 5.3125. So I can also do that. I should be able to do that otherwise. So in other words, instead of this, the 85 pixels, I can put in that with rem. Should come out to be the same. If it doesn't, I'll change it back to 85 pixels, but that should be the same. All right. Then the min width, I want that to be 40 pixels. So again, come back in here and do some more math. I think that'll just be 2.5. But yep. All right. And again, there's different ways we could have done this. We could use in here, technically it wouldn't matter since these are maximums and minimums. It would have been considered to be okay to actually do those and use pixels in there. So we could have made this 85 pixels and 40 pixels. That would have been just fine. All right. So let's see. This is commented out, so I'm going to remove that. All right. Let me put a little bit of space in here. Right there. There we go. All right, so we've got our header H2. All right. And the only thing I'm showing in here on mine, and I'm working from mine, is the only thing I want is the font size, which I bumped up from 225 to 230. And I got rid of all this other stuff. Again, just in case I might want it, what I'm going to do is just comment it out. All right. So the only thing I now have in here for the header H2 is my font size. All right. Then with the header H3, bump that down from 175% to 125%. And again, the only way that you'll figure these out is to sit and play with them a little bit and resize and see what things look like once you resize. I don't want that text indent in here anymore. So again, I'm going to just comment it out. And I'm going to add in here padding bottom 0.75 m. 0.75 times 16 is 3/4 of 16. So that's the same as saying 12 pixels. All right. And again, I don't know if I'm saying this too much or whatever, but I want you to understand everything I'm doing in here. That's why I'm doing it the way I'm doing it. All right. So let's go to the navigation menu next. All right. We got a clear left. That looks good. A list style none, a position relative. That looks good. Our ULs, LIs, we're going to float those left. Yeah. We're also going to set in here a width of 20%. So that is new. In our nav menu, ULLI, I added this. All right. When we get done with the nav menu, we'll stop, we'll save it, and we'll take a look at it and see if it's changed. It might change a little, it might change a lot. All right, then we've got our UL next. We've got a display none, a position absolute, and a top of 100. That looks good. We've got our nav menu ULLI for our inner menu with a float none. That looks good. Then we're telling it when we hover over it, we want it to display block. That looks good. This after thing that's right here, that looks good. So a lot of stuff we're not changing. Our nav menu UL, no margin, no padding. That looks fine. All right. Let's see. I am going to add in here one, just a line or two, and that is, let's see, nav item. Not nav item, nav menu. Nav menu, UL, LI, hover, UL. So when we're hovering over the submenu, we're going to give it a width of 100%. All right, so we just added this right under the existing nav menu UL. All right, next, and I'll leave that there. We've got our ULLIA, text align center, display block, padding. Okay, we don't want it. We're not working with widths anymore. We've already got all that stuff. We're setting text decoration none, background color black, color white. So again, I can come in if I want and just comment that line out. Either way would work. Some people like to leave that in there so they can see everything they've done. Some people find that to be, pardon my French, but a pain in the ass. So they won't do that. All right. Then next we've got our nav menu ULLIA current, orange, good. And then our nav menus for hovering and for focus, gray, that's fine. All right. This was something we already commented out. All right. And I'm going to look in here. And for now, at least, okay, that was everything that was in here. Now, you don't have to do this, but what I'm going to do is this, just so you see it. All right. I'm going to put in here global settings, because that's pretty much what they are. And you don't have to do this. All right. And that's everything that was in there. Okay. Already got in their navigation menu. And that was everything down through right here. All right. Now, for now, at least, I don't know if I'm going to come back to this and look at it or I'm not going to touch it. But I want to take the next thing I want to do is the sidebar. And that's this aside that's right here. So I'm going to take everything that I've got up here, this add margin, the A, the visited, all this stuff. And I'm going to comment it out for right now. All right. I may come back and use it. I don't think I'm going to. And I'm going to jump all the way down to my aside. All right. So we've got a float left. All right. Again, with the width, we're not using pixels anymore. We're going to make this 20%. All right. And the padding, which is right now set to 20 pixels. Remember, the 20 pixels is what? It is 1.25 ems. All right. And I said we were going to take a look at this. Let's finish the aside. There's not much left here. The aside UL. All right. We've got a width in here or a line height in here rather. I'm going to get rid of that. So I'm just going to comment that out. All right. And I'm going to put a width and that'll be 68.75%. A list style, none. And let's put in some padding left. Okay. So this is what I've changed in here. All right. Let's just do these these things with a navigation list, and then we're going to take a look at it. So we just changed that. All right. We've got a nav list, ULLI with we've already turned those off here with the list style none. So we really don't need that one there anymore. So I'm going to comment out both of these lines. All right, and I'm going to put in here margin bottom 0.5 em, which again, that's the same thing as saying 8 pixels. All right, and we'll put our border in here. So border 2 pixels, solid black. Okay, I might have that border in there twice. If I do, I'll have to remove the other one. That's no biggie. We can do that. And in fact, that's what we want for our ULLI. Let me, what do we have here? So I changed this stuff in here. I want to be this. So this should be ULLI. Sorry. And I'm just going to comment out this whole thing here. So our ULLI will have a margin bottom of 0.5 ems and a border that's 2 pixel solid black. All right, this. And we're going to do this one, then we're going to stop. Okay, so this is the nav list ULLIA. Display block looks good. Font weight bold looks good. Text decoration none looks good. Background color orange looks good. Padding 0.5. No, we're actually using M's already. And I got rid of, I said 0.5 em, 0.5 em. We don't want any. So remember what this is: top, right, bottom, left. All right. And we don't want, I'm going to remove this here. All right. And we're going to put in a percentage, 7.27272%. And if you say, fine, how the heck did you get that? We got that from saying 580 divided by 800 multiplied by 100. It's all those formulas that they were showing earlier. All right, color black. I don't think we even need the text align center now. All right, so those are all the changes that we've made so far. I'd say we're well more than half done. All right, so I'm going to save this. I'm going to go back to here. And what you're going to notice is it's looking different, but it's not better. First of all, that looks like it's got to be widened out a little, etc. But you can see some stuff has genuine or definitely happened in here. All right, some stuff you can tell we haven't done anything with yet. All right. Okay. Like I said, that looks like it's going to have to be widened out a bit, but I'm not worried about that right now. Okay. All right. So now we're into our section. After we do the section, we'll do the footer. All right. Then after the footer, we'll look a little bit at a mobile menu. Okay. You say, I don't know what you mean. You will, because you're going to make it with me in just a minute. So I'm down to my section here. All right. And the width, again, not pixels. We want to use percentages in here. So this is 72.5%. All right. We're floating it right. And our padding, we want to change. Remember, 20 pixels is what? 1.25 rems. If I come in here and double that, I could. Again, this is 1.25 here. All right. And when I double that, what is that? It's 2.5, right? So I have 1.25 ems. I put it in as a percentage. because that's the way they did it in the book. All right, I had it originally in there as 2.5, and I left this one at 2.5 with a percent. So you can combine rems and ems and percentages. It's not a problem doing that, in other words. All right, our H1 has a font size of 140 and a margin bottom of 0.5 em. That looks good. Our first letter has a font size of 240%. That looks good. Our section H2 has a font size of 125%. Looks good. The margin is 0.8 em, 0.5 em and 0. That'll work. All right. The section H3, 110%, and that's set up the same. That looks okay. The section P, margin bottom is 0.5 em. Okay. All right. There's a couple more things that we want to add in here for the section. Let's say that again. There's going to be a couple more things that we're going to want to add in here for the section. All right. Now, I'm not going to put a comment there. I could that said like new section adds, but that might be confusing. So I don't want to do that. So this is what I'm adding right here. I'll move that up to right near the top. That's the first one. Now I want to show you something just because I want you to understand this. I am separating these out, but let's pretend for just a minute we didn't have the font weight bold in here. So if these were identical, we could have put them all together. But since the section A has a font weight bold and the other ones do not, we split them up. Some people like to put these all on one line. Some people like to put them on multiple lines. Again, it really and truly does not matter which way you do it. It's doing the same thing. All right. Well, I had in here, and because it's one I forgot to change, I had in there 150 pixels. All right. No, let's change it. The same thing we had before. It should be 0.9375, but let's double check. And it is. All right, that is everything for the section. So let me again do a file, save all. Let's go back to this. All right. All right, it's getting there. That still looks funky. I got to make that bigger, but I'll worry about that in a little bit. All right. But you can see already it is much more responsive than it was. It is not done yet. We haven't put in a single media query. We're going to do that next, or not next, but first we got to finish up the footer here. All right. And in our footer code, let's see, clear bold, that looks good. Border top, 2 pixels solid black, that's okay. padding instead of 1 rem. I'm going to set it like we did before, and that is 0.9375 M, followed by 1.875%. Then we've got our gradients. I'm not changing those. Again, let me do a file save. So we changed this line right here, and that's the only thing in there we changed. Footer paragraph. All right. Font size, instead of 75%, we're going to make it 90% and center it. Okay. And then we have to add something in here. All right. We're almost ready for our media queries. And there really aren't that many of them. It's not going to take long to do. All right. But we have to come in here and say pound mobile underscore menu. And we're going to say display none. Don't worry about it. We'll turn it on in just a bit. All right. So that'll be our mobile menu. We'll fix that in just a bit, like I said. All right. Let's put in our media only queries, or our media queries. All right. So I'm down at the bottom. I'm going to put a comment in here that says media queries. All right. And pretty much what we were told to do in our specs. All right. What do I mean? Well, let's do the first one. And I think I don't even know if I did it. I think I did it largest to smallest, but I don't remember. Let's look at media only screen and max width 800 pixels. This is one time when you are doing media queries like this, typically you do use pixels. All right. I don't know why, it just is a standard. That's just the way people do things. All right. So I'm going to say HTML. What we were told was to turn off the background image. So I'm going to say background image none. That's going to turn off all those bats that you saw in there. Okay. That's the first thing. And in the body, the font size is supposed to be 90%. All right. And this box shadow that we have, we're not going to have any. Now, you should be at the point where this at least somewhat makes sense to you. So this is saying that if our width is between 0 and 800 pixels, we should not have a background image. All right. Our font size should be 90% of what it would be otherwise, and we should have no box shadow. All right. And again, I'm just following what's in the book. Okay. Or yeah, in our PDF or whatever you want to call it. So that's the first one. Then we're going to write another one. I'm just going to copy this line and make some changes to it. So the next one is media only with a max width. I think it was 767. All right. And in here, sorry. Well, I want to be consistent even with the way I'm doing these, so I'm going to do it like that. Don't know why it's doing that, but it is. So let's get rid of that. You can see, hopefully, you can see how intricate all this stuff is getting. All right. And how it's really, really easy to screw something up by just forgetting to put in something. Right. And one more, then we'll be done. So I'm going to give you a second to catch up. Give myself a second to catch up here. We just want to do the one for a max width of 479. All right. And I know, I was just thinking about this as we're working on it, and that is, okay, I can copy everything you're doing there, Jeff, but when we get to the one that we have to do, I'm just going to be totally hosed. All I'm going to tell you is follow the instructions as best you can. All right. And if there's something you don't get, then email me and ask me. All right. And that should be an LI, now there is no LU. All right. But again, it is so easy in here, as I mentioned to you before. It is so easy in here to screw something up. All right. So let's put the last one in here then. Okay. Now, this, all right, right here, that is one media query. Okay. So it says when the maximum width is 800, do this. Then we have another media query, which was pretty long, which says for 767, do this. So that's another media query. It has many components to it. I don't think I've screwed up anything, but as always, it's possible I did. Let's do one more. And remember, these media queries must start with @media and almost always only screen. I don't know if I've ever seen it without the only screen. it's doing what it's doing, but. Now, I do want to mention one last thing to you here. Okay. As I've said, this, when we're starting to work with our media queries, okay? All right. We had several of these, as you saw. Again, this was the first one, the second one, all the way down, and the third one. All right. If you typically forget, because I do, so if you forget that, you're going to get an error someplace. So look through yours, please, if you would, and make sure that you've got nothing showing. It'll typically show it over here too, someplace over here in red where you've got an error, or it'll show it up here and it'll have a number. All right, as far as how many errors you have. All right. Now, when I copied my stuff over for some reason, I didn't bring over everything with me. So I've got it. I've done this. All right. But I'm going to go and I'm going to look at the authors for a second. All right. Now, when you look in here, this is what I want to copy. I could have taken it out of the book, but I can't copy out of the book. And that is this. In fact, I need the line up there here too. This is how we bring that slick nav in. All right, I'm going to leave it up there for a minute. So if you want to copy it into your index.html, you can do it as well. It is in the book. All right. And what is it doing? Well, it's saying here we want to be able to use whatever the slicknav.css is. We're copying it from over here. I'm hoping that that path is going to be okay. All right, we're bringing in the actual JavaScript source. This is what makes the code that makes us the word menu, etc. and stuff that's in here. And this is saying to prepend it to the mobile menu. So in other words, when we go into mobile mode, this is saying right here that you're supposed to be using this. All right, I don't know if that's put well, but it's the way I'm putting it. So I'm going to copy this and I'll leave it up there for just a minute yet. But I'm going to copy it and I'm going to put it into my index.html file. All right. And the only other thing I wanted to show you, I think that's in, yeah, is this line here. We've got to add that line, even though there's nothing in it. We've turned that off and that won't be turned on again. That's right after our header. All right. We want that to turn on when we go into mobile mode, and otherwise we want it to be off. So again, I'm going to grab these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines of code right now, and I'm going to copy them because I forgot to my thing in here. So I'm going to put it right there. Just like that, move this over. All right, and finally that line with our nav in it. All right. Let's see how they did it here. All right. They took the ULs, everything that was in here for our nav section. I'm just going to copy theirs because I'm sure mine is by now it's probably screwed up. There it is. All right. So this is all closed up now. I'm going to fix it right now. The first thing we want to do is we want to come in here and I want to grab those 6 lines or whatever the heck it was right here. By now, hopefully you had plenty of time to do that. And where do I want to copy them? I want to copy them into here. It's the problem of having two different editors open. It's foolish on my part. So there's that. So now I've got all the slick nav stuff in there. The other thing I want to put in here is right up above this, the nav line here. I want to put another nav in here. And the ID, whoops, the ID is equal to, I think it was nav mobile or mobile nav. I don't remember what it was now. So I'm going to find it. Mobile menu. Right there. And that's everything. So the only thing that we had to change in here in the HTML, the only thing that we had to come in and change in the HTML is we had to, and again, this was in your book, and that was to add the stuff for the slick nav and add an empty mobile menu, because that mobile menu is going to be filled in using our media queries, for lack of better words. All right. I have no idea if this is going to work or what it's going to look like, but I'm going to try it anyway. All right. Now, it isn't perfect. There's still things wrong with it. Like what? Well, that's way too small. That's the picture of the cat. All right. And now that cat is way, way, way too small. So I'll have to work on that. All right. Secondly, let's take a look at what it looked like in here. These were our requirements. So it said when we finished, it was supposed to look like this. I believe mine are still at the top. So I'm going to have to move those down and I'm going to have to make the cat bigger. But let's take a look at the rest of it. All right, so I'm going to make this smaller. And for just a second, move that down here and then move this over. So like I said, that's got to be moved down to the bottom, but I want to look at the rest of it. I should have just grabbed the authors, but I did it myself. Shame on me. Not that. There we go. Oh, all right, that's how it looks. And that's how it's supposed to look. So I've got to move that down and I've got to make that bigger. All right. Far as I can tell, everything else looks like it's okay. All right. So what I will do for tomorrow is I'll check mine, all right, against the author's and see what I didn't do that the author did. All right, and I'll give you that when we first start. And then when we get done, that shouldn't take long, 10 or 15 minutes, I would think max. We're, like I said, we're going to come in there. We're first going to build this landing page. All right, the one I showed you earlier. Hopefully this will work. And this is all, I did all this. All right. So if it doesn't, it's 100% blame on me. But when we look in here, we view the source. All right, I don't have, let's see, where is the CSS? There it is. You can see we do have media queries in here. 700, 425, 325. All right. And we should be able to get all of this tomorrow. What I will do as well, when we create this, if it's easier for you to just watch, then watch. Because what I will do tomorrow with this one, I'm not comfortable going out there and taking homework that I'm giving you and throwing it out into a GitHub repo. I don't think that's right. But if it's something like this that I did, I have no problem sticking it out in a repo. So tomorrow we'll do at least two things. Number one, we'll make sure that this whole thing is fixed up that we were working on right now, this thing. So I guarantee you it will look the way it's supposed to look. All right, I'll have that fixed and we'll go over it. Then we're going to build this Blues landing page. And if there's any time left, we're going to take it and extend it and make a whole site out of it. All right, and it doesn't matter which one I bring up. So we'll have 4 or 5 pages of it. All right, so that's what we've got. It's 11:24. There was a lot that we went over today anyway, so I'm just going to stop right now and we will pick it up tomorrow. All right, I'll talk to you then. Have a good rest of the day. Thanks.